More than our usual scallywags and ne'er-do-wells, and I'm sorry. And the back row, no, that you have a crew here, Justin. Tell us who they are.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. I appreciate the description of our folks. It tends to be somewhat apt, so we're happy to.
It's the usual ones that are here, like you.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right. In the back row. Yeah.
You better go before you're digging your even.
I know. I'll be exiting the committee room as fast as possible at this, but thank you. I appreciate the many of you who joined us today or had a meeting with some of the folks who were able to attend today. Today was the Kansans for Conservation Day at the Capitol, and so we had about 80 folks representing about 25 different conservation organizations in the Capitol Day just to meet and talk about conservation with you all and express your support. And we're really happy to be able to talk about grasslands today as well. In particular, Secretary Beam has led an effort over the past year to arrange some grassroots meetings and talk about the importance of grasslands to the state and the folks who steward those and provide those ecosystem benefits. And so it's been a really interesting process to learn and to hear from some of that. And so we want to take the time while we had some of our conservation supporters in the Capitol to hopefully arrange just and bring some of those folks to you so you can hear it directly from them, some of the issues they've been talking with the Secretary about, and some of the things that they'd like to work on. That's my introduction, Mr. Chair. I'm happy to introduce some of the folks that will be coming up to speak. Or,
go ahead. All right, or we can do it however you want to.
Mr. Chair, I'll let you, sir.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you all for being here. And we do appreciate those of you that turmoil through this committee every time we meet and are here. And yes, I'm looking at you. Yes. So, no, thank you. Okay, this is important. I'm looking forward to this presentation today. You know, a lot of times we focus a lot on irrigation and growing corn and growing wheat, but really in the heart of Kansas is grass. We're really a grass state when you look at it. You know, we think we're a corn state or we're the wheat state, but in many areas we have some of the best grass in the country and in the nation, world, whatever, you know, we really do. And so really today is going to be a committee we have 4 folks who are going to present and on looking at grasslands in Kansas. So just let's get underway. David Kraft, the director of the Kansas Grazing Lands Coalition, will be here first. And so welcome to committee and thank you for being here.
I have some just kind of an overview of some of the things that I'm going to talk about today that I'll pass around so everybody have a copy of that. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. It is I appreciate your comments leading off the importance of grasslands and just elevating that over the last year with Secretary Beam has been great to see the interest not only from the state level, but also all the way down to the grassroots, and that being the producers that are the ones out there defending those areas each and every day. A little bit about myself, as you described, I'm one of 2 coordinators with the Kansas Grazing Land Coalition. A little bit of history back on that, if you will. We were formed in 1991 by a group of ranchers and resource professionals and are governed by a board of directors consisting of landowners that stretch across the state of Kansas. Prior to working with the Kansas Grazing Land Coalition, I was a rangeland specialist with USDA NRCS for 36 years, served as a state rangeland management specialist for 12 years, and then finished my career with the National Soil Survey Division writing ecological site descriptions about plant communities in these areas that we call grasslands and rangelands through the central part of the United States, from the Gulf Coast up through the Dakotas and Montana. To say the least, I've seen a lot of grasslands. There are none better than what is in Kansas. So not just in the nation, but I would contend in the world. So let me give you a little bit of a snapshot of what our mission is and who I represent. We are a group that has a mission and vision to regenerate Kansas grazing land resources through cooperative management, economics, ecology, production, education, and technical resource or assistance programs. Little snapshot of Kansas to kind of put those numbers together. Kansas rangelands consist of tallgrass prairies, mixed grass prairies, short grass prairies, and sand sage prairies. These 4 dominant ecosystems contain just under 15.8 million acres of rangeland, which the majority is privately owned. Pasture lands also in Kansas consist of primarily cool season introduced or tame species such as smooth brome, tall fescue, and certain wheat grasses. In addition to range and pasture acres, Kansas has a long history of establishing or reestablishing permanent grass vegetation in programs like the Conservation Reserve Program, with nearly 3 million acres currently enrolled in Kansas. As we speak here today, these privately owned acres support livestock such as ruminants like cattle, sheep, goats, as well as horses, both tame and wild. They are home to regionally important wildlife species which call these diverse life-giving ecosystems their home. Some of these species are solely dependent on these remaining grassland acres that we also call home. Kansas grasslands are economic drivers in our rural counties of Kansas, where local livestock as well as livestock from outsider borders arrive in Kansas to add pounds of flesh in an economically efficient manner due to their ability to meet the daily needs of these livestock like very few other grasslands in the world. Cow-calf and yearling operations, as well as sheep flocks and goat herds, consume both native and introduced grass species from across the state of Kansas and produce revenue that supports the economies of both rural and our urban communities. The diverse native grass communities from east to west are also either home or vital stopping points for millions of pollinators that play vital roles in all parts of plant and animal life. Kansas, unlike many states heavily covered in grassland plant communities, are mostly privately owned and operated. These grasslands are greater than 97% owned by Kansas taxpayers. The tax base is a treasure in more ways than just its aesthetically unmatched vistas. It truly is a life-bred resource for our great state. Its human inhabitants, the farmers, ranchers, managers, and caretakers, are also the last hope for their long-term survival. Generations upon generations of caretakers have honed their skills in connecting domesticated livestock to the diverse plant communities that were planted by their creator. With livestock as a tool, they also provide for and create habitat that mimic historic grazing events that are vital to the plant community's existence and the wildlife that coexist alongside. Managers live within the understanding that these grasslands, primarily native warm season species, thrive under 3 primary ecological drivers: grazing, weather, and fire. Each driver, in its variability, keeps these grasslands in a constant state of flux, never expressing themselves in the same way from one year to the other. Their management truly is an art. With each additional year of European influence on our landscapes, the challenges and threats continue to increase and pose both a near and long-term risk to their existence. From fragmentation to invasive species, both native and introduced, the management and care for our grasslands becomes more difficult with each year. Millions of dollars of income and sweat equity are poured back into these treasured ecosystems each year to attempt to just maintain a status quo. Recently, science has indicated that status quo is not enough to push back the threat of pressures that seem to come from all directions. One of these threats is the rapid expansion of woody species throughout the state. Plants such as eastern red cedar, just one of many, have seen a 25,000% increase in the last 45 years, according to the Kansas Forest Service. With the recent understanding that each seed-bearing tree impacts 26 acres around the tree itself, the expansion of this aggressive species and others increase the likelihood that some of our Kansas grasslands, and especially our rangelands, will soon be dominated by a plant community, a woody plant community, rather than the historic plant communities dominated by a diverse group of warm and cool season native grasses, nectarine forbs and legumes, as well as desirable shrub species. To defend the core grasslands of Kansas, more acres will need to be managed with the use of tree removal equipment. More prescribed burning will need to touch the landscapes of Kansas, and in many situations, more frequently or more timely. Woody encroachment is not the only threat, however. Invasive species such as Old World bluestems, both yellow and Caucasian, continue to spread across our landscapes, oftentimes with very limited control measures in existence and extremely costly to apply. Species that have been well documented, like Serratia lespedeza, continue to increase in the presence across all locations in Kansas. Its ability to compete in all landscape positions and all types of plant communities makes it nearly impossible to control. With all that said, there still remains great hope and optimism in Kansas grasslands. Another one of the many treasures of Kansas are its ranchers, farmers, and managers. Many caretakers are staying on the cutting edge of technology, applying their own sweat equity to keep grasslands intact and viable. Thousands of acres have been successfully rid of encroaching woody species. Prescribed fire is touching plant communities for the first time in years, and grazers are fine-tuning their skills of herdmanship in the latest technology to fight back against these threats. However, they are just one piece of the community. We all stand to lose or gain, either as active partners or community members or passive neighbors. To maintain, enhance, restore, or regenerate our Kansas grasslands, we all need to play our part. Are there any questions that any of the committee members would like to ask of me?
Sure, thank you for your presentation. Representative Droege?
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for your presentation. I was curious about the fire being used on plant that hadn't been used in years. Where are we seeing that? Eastern end of the Flint Hills?
In just about every part of what we would consider native warm season plant communities. We're seeing more fire in the central part of the state and even in the western part of the state than we have in decades. The Flint Hills certainly has a very established fire culture. And even in the last 10 to 15 years, there's a developing fire culture in a lot of these other plant communities like the Red Hills or Chip Hills, and even in the Smoky Hills in north central and kind of the western north central part of the state of Kansas. Shortgrass prairies are also seeing a resurgence of fire being used. The return interval, so the time in which from one fire to the next takes place in the western part is more likely 1 in 10 years versus maybe 5 to 7 in the central part of the state, whereas in the Flint Hills we know that maybe once or twice in a 3 or 4 year period is very common. But fire is touching landscapes that have never been touched before. We also know that because of that, it can be used as a tool to prevent wildfires that have been a part of some communities, like in the south central as well as the north central part in the last few years. Those are fire-starved communities, and the result of not fire being used enough over the last 50, 60, 70 years have now made them very vulnerable to the risk of wildfire.
Thank you. Can I have another part to that?
Yes, go ahead.
I was, my friends in my district, one of the big things they asked me is, are there any new controls for Old World bluestem?
Yeah. Great question. So any new controls to Old World bluestem, it remains one of, in my opinion, my humble opinion, as one of the emerging great threats to at least the tallgrass prairie. Some research that has been conducted in locations like Fort Hays State will show that an area can increase or double in size 3 times in 10 years. And so the spread of those particular species make them extremely difficult to control because they are grass species as well. And chemical that is now somewhat effective is extremely expensive to apply. The problem in some of those areas is the topography or the rough terrain that they might occupy as well, making it difficult for treatment to really take place and be effective. There is emerging research and studies being done now with different timings of fire, the use of prescribed burning to manipulate those plants during the growing season or the late growing season, and it's showing some promise there as well. All of that means that the manager has to really manage way out in front of the game, not just momentary decisions to use fire, but how do I plan fire to be effective in keeping some of those species in check, but also promoting the ones that we desire. Great question.
Thank you for that. And drones seem to be showing up quite a bit, maybe not for Old World bluestem, but for Serratia. Thank you for that input.
Yes, yeah, the drone use of drones, I think is an emerging technology. I witnessed the first application of chemical on some rangeland near where I live, near Gridley, last year. Those devices and the technology that they have and the imagery that they use are certainly an emergency or an emerging science and application process that I think has great hope.
Other questions? I think kind of along that same line, as we look at, conservation funding, moving forward with conservation, and I'm out west, and red cedars are taking over. Where do you see a partnership there, or should be the state's role in helping to get, so we can gain back more acres?
Yeah. So for every acre that, eventually becomes dominated by a woody species like eastern red cedar, we lose the value of that from a grazing resource perspective. And so there is cost associated to the loss of those acres, without a doubt. Recently, we just had a prescribed burn workshop in Stockton, Kansas a week ago, Tuesday. And at that meeting, we had over 30 individuals there, a lot of them ranchers. And driving up from Hayes to Stockton, we begin to see that that was like north of Salina 10 years ago. And so that green glacier, as we would maybe not so kindly describe the movement of that particular plant, is moving further west all the time. Communities' awareness, I think, and also getting past the fear of using prescribed burn. Eastern red cedar is an easy tree to kill. As long as we get it when it's young, especially, prescribed fire is extremely effective. But getting past the fear of using fire, collaborative efforts with prescribed burn associations are going to be a big part of that, where we can join forces locally with the experience and also the equipment of local groups to put together, but also finding support from other agencies, other groups that might be able to come alongside them in that same effort is going to be vital.
Well, you just described my district, 'cause that is my district. And so you had a good turnout last Tuesday, because I remember it was about 15
It was cold.
below.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, it was very cold. Yeah.
So they were finding a place to no. That good. Thank you for your efforts. Any other questions? Okay.
I do
thanks.
have a couple other publications that I will just send around if anybody. This kind of describes the expansion of eastern red cedar,
Okay.
But I'll pass one down each side
Very good.
for anybody that might look at it.
Thank you. Our next presenter will be Dr. Jesse Nippert from Kansas State University. Welcome to committee.
Thanks for having me here. Yeah, it's an honor to be here today to talk to you about something I'm passionate about. A lot of what I have to say is pretty similar to Mr. Kraft, so it'll be a continuation of a lot of these ideas. I'm at Kansas State University, and the research platform that a lot of our work is conducted under is the Konza Prairie. So the Konza Prairie is both the longest running and most successful research enterprise in the history of Kansas State University. It's been going now for over 50 years. There's over 350 graduate degrees that have been offered through Konza Prairie, and over 2,300 scientific publications. It is the most studied grassland on the planet, and it is not that far down the road from here in Topeka. And so it's been sort of the honor of my life to have been affiliated with the Konza and to continue the mission and the good work that has come out of there. So, like our theme of today, I'm quite passionate about killing woody plants. And it's something that has, as has already been noted, is something that should be a concern to everyone that is interested in keeping our rangelands healthy. I put together a few slides, and I'll go through them quickly, and then I'm happy to answer any questions if any of it didn't make sense. So when we think about tallgrass prairie, when we think about some of the impacts that can be had, I've got a few of them that are listed up there. The biggest one, of course, is reduced forage. When woody plants displace grasses, there's less grass on the landscape for our livestock, and therefore there's just less carrying capacity in that ecosystem. There's a lot of other things, though, that you probably don't think about. Things like changes in species diversity and abundance of a lot of our pollinators and our avian, small mammal, and fish communities in these streams, as well as there's an increased fire risk, because when it does turn into a cedar lot, if it gets big, that's a much difficult burn to control compared to a grass fire. There's also things like an increased disease threat. Those cedars bring ticks. and tick-borne diseases are a big threat for our state. There's a lot of things, though, that I'm guessing you probably don't think about, and a lot of these are happening below ground. One of the things that I do in my, the type of studies that I do is I measure how plants use water. And I think about water flux out of the leaves, and woody plants use a lot more water than the grassy plants that they're replacing. In addition, their roots are different, and those roots are going into different portions of the soil, and they're drying the soil in different ways. There's an alteration in the groundwater supplies. There's also an alteration in the groundwater chemistry. So there's stream drying, there's changes in where that water's going, and there's changes in how that water's getting to our groundwater. And so there's changes above ground that are happening and changes below ground. I agree with Mr. Kraft that eastern red cedar is a huge problem, but it's a problem we can control. Most of our work has been focused on these clonal shrubs. They're expanding at a very rapid pace, and because they are asexual and they are not killed by fire and they are not killed by being cut, they're a lot more difficult to sort of manage on the landscape. So I said I measure a lot of how plants use water. We can measure this at an individual level, and in general, a woody plant uses about twice as much water, or a little over twice as much, as the grasses for that same footprint on the landscape that they're replacing. We can also measure where that water came from that they're using. You can use isotopes as a natural tracer, and in general, woody plants are pretty plastic about where they're getting their water, but it tends to be a little bit deeper compared to the grasses. So they're mining that deep soil water more effectively than the grasses are. You can also then start to scale this up across the landscape. And so when we start to think about, based on the fact that the woody plants are displacing the grasses and then they're changing on the landscape, what percent increase in water being lost out of the ecosystem is happening? And so at the Konza Prairie, over that roughly 40-year period that I have up there, the grass cover declined by 20%, was replaced by those woody plant species. And because we measure this isn't a model, this is measured data. We know it's an increase in the water being lost out of the system through transpiration. That's the water that the plants evaporate out of their leaf surfaces and goes back to the atmosphere. It's an increase of about 25%. So that's a loss of water by a quarter with only a 20% change in woody plants on the landscape. So if we start to summarize the points that I have so far, those shrubs are using a lot more water. They're producing roots that are different in terms of their coarseness and depth of penetration, and presumably there's differences in soil moisture change through time. Soil moisture change and that loss of deep soil resources is really critical when you think about drought and the frequency of drought. Those deep soil resources, grasses don't use them a lot, but they're real important when you go into a drought. And if they have been lost prior to a drought by the woody species that exist on the landscape, that forage that is out there is not going to survive. So one of the things we've been doing is trying to understand what this loss of deep soil resources means for this community. And I can show you this in a variety of ways. So this is a technique that actually maps soil moisture, in this case down to 2 meters deep, so about 7 foot deep in the soil. This is on a transect that's approximately 50, 60 feet long. And it's a picture of soil moisture over a course of one growing season. And under those woody plants, all that deep soil moisture is lost. And this is, again, measured, not modeled. Whereas under that grassy community, the grasses mine the surface soils like they normally do. They're very effective at getting water in the surface soils, that top foot or so of the soil. But they don't mine that deep soil moisture unless they really need it later on. You can also look at changes using sensors that are deployed across the landscape that are taking measurements every 1, 2, 3, 4 minutes. So high-frequency sensor measurements. This data shows a drying pattern between grassy and woody at 2 different depths. The top panel is in the 15-centimeter range. The bottom panel is 60 centimeters, so about 1.5 feet. And this is starting from day 0 and going out to approximately 36, 40 days. And you can see in the surface soils, there's no difference in water being lost between the grasses and shrubs. But in that deep portion, those shrubs are mining that deep soil moisture that exists. So that's 2 different ways I've shown a loss of deep soil moisture under shrubs. The last one is using long-term data. The beauty of the Konza Prairie is things have been done the same way in the same places for a very long period of time. People come and go that run that place, but the measurements stay the same. And this long-term data allows us to understand some of these patterns that you can't see in short time scales. This is soil moisture. The column on the left is soil moisture comparative between moderately encroached in a grassy area and then the column on the right is a severely encroached in a grassy area. If there's no directional change in the line, it means there's no difference between grassy and woody area. And if it's a positive trend, it means the soil moisture is drying in the woody compared to a grassy. So you can see in those most superficial soil layers, no real change in water loss over the last 40 years in between grassy and shrubby. But down deep, those shrubs have dried the soil significantly over a 40-year period as they have come in. When Kansas started, there weren't any shrubs there. It was just all grass. And now a fairly significant portion of it is woody. And so that consequence of this change has been these woody plants replacing the grassies on the landscape. So the last thing that I wanted to tell you about is what happens when those coarse woody roots replace the fine fibrous roots of grasses. They create what is called a macropore. And a macropore in the soil, you can think of it as a large channel that water preferentially flows through. Think about during a drought or in the middle of a July summer day, you got cracks out in your yard and other places. When water does happen, it flows in those big cracks in the soil a lot faster. On a volume basis, those large cracks aren't a large proportion of the soil, but in terms of effectively moving a lot of water down, moves a hell of a lot of water in a short period of time. And so these woody plants create something similar to that, these macropores. And so when water does come in, it preferentially flows through those cracks. We tested this a couple years ago in this experiment. This little cartoon drawing on the one on the left in a grassy area, we set up a sprinkler system that just watered all the time. And a few feet away in a shrubby area, we set up the exact same thing. We measured those patterns of drying in the soil, similar to that previous one. And then we just watched this round the clock for several days in a row. So in that top panel, 2 hours into this irrigation experiment, you can see where the water is in the soil under a grassy versus shrubby. You then look at 13 hours, you can still see those patterns. You're a day in and a day and a half in, and you can see under those shrubs that water has penetrated way deeper. It was lost out of those superficial soil layers, and it's now out of the grassy rooting zone. Those coarse woody roots of the shrubs move that water to a deeper depth faster, and then it's not there for the grasses when they need it. So this is a third way of thinking about how these woody plants are changing basically the hydrological cycle in a range system after they invade. To this point, when we're thinking about what do we do about this, we can think about management strategies above ground. We can think about a grassy hillside on the left here in the Flint Hills and a shrubby hillside on the right here in the Flint Hills. And of course, one of the strategies we could do to combat that is to come in and cut all those shrubs down or poison them out or burn them out or do whatever we can. But even after you do this, oh, my animation didn't work. Even after you do this, those roots are still there. You can cut down those top parts, but those roots are still there. They're still going to funnel that water faster through the soil, and it's going to get lost out of the system to a much faster degree. The last thing that I will say, just kind of as a summary, is I provided some of that information on the amount of water that is getting lost additionally from increased transpiration by those shrubs. I went ahead and scaled that up to units that I thought would resonate a little bit more with this committee. We know right now that around 15,000 square kilometers of the Flint Hills, that's the Flint Hills with a lot of fire, has become woody encroached. This is from a study that was conducted about 10 years ago. So give or take, some areas have gone up and some areas might have went down. It's still a large portion. If you think about that increased water loss for that area, it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 2.2 million acre feet of additional water that is being lost by these woody plants as they replace grassy ones. For point of context, the current water holding capacity of Tuttle Creek Reservoir, the second largest reservoir in the state of Kansas, is around 300,000 acre feet. This is 5 times the current water holding capacity of Tuttle Creek Reservoir that is being lost additionally each year in the Flint Hills based on this woody encroachment problem. So even if you don't care about forage, and even if you don't care about grassland birds, or you don't care about bugs, or you don't care about soil carbon, or all these other things, I bet you care about water. And we're losing a lot of water, as these woody plants come in and they displace the grasses that were there originally. So thanks a lot.
Okay, Dr. Nippert, thank you. Questions? Representative Seiwert.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. We talk about this root deal. It's really interesting because, we're lower to ground surface water. We're seeing a lot of trees dying in the cities. Somebody was saying what happens, we drop the aquifer down and they've lost their tap roots to the water and they're dying now because they can't get down there fast. Is that a true story? Because the city of Hutchinson, let's say, they've got a ton of trees that are big trees that are dying. It's going to cost a lot of money for the city to take them out. What would have caused them trees to die? Would that be one of the reasons?
Yeah, that was a good point of clarification. For most woody species, they're not super drought tolerant, and they aren't great at tolerating fluctuations. But like the species we were talking about here, eastern red cedar and a lot of these clonal shrubs, they're really drought tolerant. So if you're talking about things like cottonwood, which you'd consider to be a free adaphyte, and others, they rely on permanent access to a reliable water source. And if they lose that reliable water source, they don't last a very long period of time. So it's only a few of these woody species that are causing this problem that we're here to talk about today. And for those woody species, they tend to be quite desiccation resistant.
And that was some of the people in my town have asked me is that why the trees are dying? But they're like elm, not cottonwoods, but they're elm and oak and trees that were planted when they built their houses. But is that just because the surface water is running out of them?
More than likely, yeah, more than likely.
Representative Minix.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Jesse, who's your favorite sister-in-law?
Eileen Minix.
Uh-oh, I'm in trouble now.
All right. Representative Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You didn't make any mention about the larger woody trees along the drainages in the Flint Hills, particularly the elm and the locust and large trees that are, and their impact on water and erosion. Do you have any comments about that?
Yeah, so from my perspective in the Flint Hills, keeping it as grassy as possible should be a high priority. The headwater streams that exist through the Flint Hills, provide refugia for a whole host of species, provide a lot of ecosystem services. Historically, with fire, based on all the records I've seen, there were never a whole extensive riparian community, a lot of these streams in the Flint Hills. We are seeing expansion of a lot of them, but like eastern red cedar, a lot of them are easier to control, cutting them down. A lot of them don't resprout. Honey locust is an example of one that does. It's a little harder to control. It also can survive in areas that aren't in a riparian community. These species, while they use a lot of water, they don't use as much water in a footprint as these clonal shrubs that I was talking about. The layers of leaves in those shrub communities, the density of leaves, if you think about how much sunlight they're extracting, exceeds a deciduous hardwood forest in Pennsylvania or Ohio. I mean, they are ridiculously dense canopies. That's why there's no grass that lives underneath them. So they use a lot of water. They're using more water in an area, if you normalized by a footprint area, they're using more water than those large riparian trees. And those large riparian trees arguably are a little easier to control and for the most part don't spread out of the riparian area.
Okay, thank you very much.
Representative Bozier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your very interesting presentation. Back in the day, I took range management class with Dr. Clinton Owensby. So the Cons of Prairie is something that, we studied back then. And he appeared in front of the Livestock and Meat Industry Council, it's probably been 5 or 6 years ago, requesting for the university to find someone to oversee the Cons of Prairie. Did you take that position?
No. I've been faculty at Kansas State since 2007, and since I was hired, I've been active on Cons of Prairie. There's a very large NSF award that sort of oversees a lot of the research that is done out there broadly, just on range management and general ecology of this system, and I have led that program since 2017. But like I mentioned before, it has been my privilege and honor to have worked out there for my entire career. But I don't think in this example from Professor Owensby, I don't think he was referring to me, but he's been a great steward and advocate of range science for a long period of time.
I would definitely agree with that. Thank you.
Can you talk a little bit about, because you also were gifted the ranch right to the east, correct? Across the highway, and so the research area has expanded. Is that, and I got another follow-up to that, is that I understand that correct?
And no, the area that is held by the Konza Prairie hasn't changed since around 1980. To the eastern part on the other side of 177 is the Randall's Ranch, which historically has been managed by Professor Owensby.
Okay.
And that is still held within the College of Agriculture as a range research site. The Konza Prairie is both managed and owned by the Nature Conservancy of Kansas, as well as the Division of Biology at Kansas State University.
So talk about the Konza Prairie then, that because we see, you know, this time pretty quick, we'll see fire, we'll see, yeah, I guess I haven't looked at, I'll have to look closer. So I know there's some deep ravines, so if I fall in, somebody will come get me, but I don't see a lot of woody species like what many of us do. So, and not to belabor the fact, but go through, I mean, it's a big area, but go through, I mean, you don't burn the thing or burn the acreage every year. I'm guessing there are a number of different things, and is it you know, lack of a better term, paddocked out for different experiments, some of these long range you know, experiments, and how do you control? Do you do other methods of controlling some of these invasives and some of these woodies?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So the Konza Prairie, when it was set up, it's a little shy of 9,000 acres. When it was set up, it was divided into 60 landscape units, which we call watershed. It's not a true watershed in a hydrological system, but anywhere from a couple hundred to, you know, pushing, you know, a little over 500 acres. So some of them are pretty big. And they were all assigned a burn frequency, 1, 2, 4, and unburned. So some of them get burned every year, normally in the spring, and then 2, 4, and then the unburned tend to get burned every 20 years. We also have season-a-year burns, and so we burn winter, summer, spring, and fall to look at the timing of fire on the landscape. Roughly a third of the site is grazed by a captive bison herd, and so those bison herd are not treated as a commodity. If they get injured, they fall ill, they break a leg, they're not rescued. You know, they're a treatment on the landscape. And then we work with the Kansas State University Animal Science Unit, and they put cow-calf pairs out there for 6 months a year and do an early intensive stocking on the whole eastern side that borders 177. And so we got bison, we got cattle, and we've got ungrazed of a variety of fire frequencies. Portions of that site that are anything basically that's not burned every year has started to undergo encroachment. It's just not a cedar lot like you might be used to, but the amount of woody species that are out there has expanded so much so that when we bring people in, Konza in any given year has somewhere in the neighborhood of 50,000 visitors, either to the nature trail or for scientific or educational research visits. And one of the things people always say is, I thought this was supposed to be a prairie. And it's because of how onerous this problem is. This is, in my opinion, after conversion to row crop agriculture, the single greatest threat to grasslands there is. This is the conservation threat of my lifetime. And it is a threat to livelihoods of a lot of people in the state who are proud to be Kansans, they're proud of our heritage, and they might not be working the land, but they're benefiting from the water and the resources and the tax base and everything else on this land. And so this is a real conservation concern. This isn't just some nerdy dude from K-State who really cares about measuring water out of plants. This is a big threat to like the livelihoods here in Kansas.
Very good. Thank you. Other questions? Seeing none. Oh, Representative Minix.
Just as a testimonial, we've burnt our short grass prairie 320 miles west of here over the last 15 to 20 years. And my neighbors thought I was crazy to start with. After a few years, they come by and said, when you're burning yours, you want to come over and help us with ours? We've got quite a few that do a prescribed burn on short buffalo. We have a little side oats grandma. and I think it's improved things. I'm honestly seeing some old world blue stem starting to show up in my area. We're trying to take care of that. It's still in small spots, but we're working on things like that. But the fire in the short grass, the Indians used to burn things. That's where the buffalo like to go the next year. It's improved our pastures tremendously. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. One person's pleasure is another person's pain, I believe, that comes. Yes. Prescribed, yes. And cerebral Lespedeza is one of those. It depends on where you are too in the Great Plains. Up next, Daniel Mushrush. Welcome to committee. Thanks for being here.
Well, now that you have the qualified people have spoken, I guess they're bringing in the scrubs. My name is Daniel Mushrush. We ranch as a family in Chase County, right in the heart of the Flint Hills. A little bit about how we arrived not only there, but in Kansas in general. My great-great-great-grandfather and his brother actually fought for the Union with a brigade out of Wisconsin. They lost their parents when they were 16 and 17. My great-great-great-grandfather wrote 17 on a piece of paper and put it under his shoe. So he told a Union recruiter he was over 17, and they let him in. Once he was done, he got a land claim for his service, and they walked from Appleton, Wisconsin to a little bit west of Elmdale, Kansas, if you know where that is. And we still have that little 80, I guess, if you will, in the family. And we've been kind of trying to hold on from there. They asked me today to talk about some of the things we're doing with the conservation deal. And I think maybe before I get into the how, I want to talk a little bit about the why. Obviously, we've been here a while. I don't see me as the apex or the final straw. I have 4 young children myself. I hope they have the same opportunities I did to live in the Flint Hills, and I hope that my grandkids do as well. And so I have to leave it better than how I found it, and that is getting a little more difficult. One of the things that we are doing is the GPGI program through NRCS. I guess squeaky wheel does get grease if you do talk about kind of innovative solutions with NRCS, and that was one thing that I'm kind of proud to be one of the first producers to use that program and kind of, I guess, provide input to the development. But to answer one of the questions over here about kind of the headwaters in the Flint Hills, we are cutting those trees out. We are seeing a better water cycle up there. Somebody else had mentioned something about fire frequency. We are in the Flint Hills in Chase County. We burn a lot. We do big fires. Topeka knows that. Omaha knows that. But we are doing it. We're not being cowboys about it. We do have reason. But there are areas within even the Chase County where there are fires no longer carrying to those creeks. Just long story short, that's where the soils are deeper. That's where the grass is going to be a little bit more palatable to the livestock. It's also close to the water source in general. That's where cattle are going to stay. So they tramp it out. We can't get fire to carry down to a creek. And over the course of my great-grandfather's career, my father's career, 2 trees turned into 10, turned into 250, turned into 1,000, and now we got a mess. And so we are cutting those trees out. We are, anecdotally, we actually had EPA down a year ago. I think this is one area there we can lean into this and show them that we're doing the right thing. When they were looking, we started at the top of the headwater. We'd cut about 100 yards, make a place for a skid steer to cross back and forth. Over the course of a couple days, it'd start to get kind of muddy. It'd start to get, to the point that you couldn't cross where you'd started. You'd have to move down 100 yards. You'd make a new crossing so you could go back and forth and rinse and repeat, and we'll do that all the way down a creek. And we'll get that water, maybe not 100%, but we're getting it closer. Some of the other things we're doing, I think, kind of to link it to why is this germane to the state of Kansas, we are investing in, I think we're one of the first in the state of Kansas, maybe the first and one of the first in the nation to control our grazing with virtual fence, collars on cows, prescribing that grazing where they need it, when they need it on those creek bottoms, but then pushing them in the hills when those areas need it. And so we can carry a fire down through there. So once we get this expensive mechanical tree control done, we can handle it more economically in the future and get more economical benefit out of it, which I think is important for whether we're talking the state of Kansas, the USD 284 school district in Cottonwood Falls. I mean, these things that really matter to my family and I think matter to this committee in terms of funding and finance. To that point, ultimately, I said, why? Well, we're raising a family. You know, that is the third pillar of sustainability. If we have a big, beautiful prairie in Chase County and nobody lives there, what do we do? We have to be able to make a living out there, and so that is important to me. Through some of these things, we're not, you know, we're barely getting through it the last couple years, but it is forcing us to be innovative. We have been able to export Kansas products to, I think, about a dozen nations. And so this is something that we're really pushing on, and I'll try to keep it short. I didn't have any slides or anything, but I will leave it with a couple sticks as I was thinking about sticks and carrots. You know, the state of California just had a major fire in Palisade. Now that it's written on digital stone, I guess, here in public, Manhattan is going to have a problem, guys. And now you as a committee can't know you didn't know. It's a tinderbox. And we're going to see that in Wichita. We're going to see that in Council Grove. As these trees surround these communities, it's going to be a problem. And it is something we need to get in front of it before it takes care of itself. That is a problem. The other elephant in the room, and you'll see squirming behind me, I guarantee it. I, as an ag producer, deeply appreciate the taxation of land use for agriculture. It is being abused rurally. I can't compete with recreation land use. Those guys can outbid me. Their incentive is to convert to woody encroachment. It's a complete shift in outcomes for, I'd say, the anti-conservation, if you will. But when they're managing for the thing that we're actively trying to prevent, and they have more money than us, we're going to lose. I've talked to our county appraiser, and this is an ask I might have with you without changing law. A couple things that they've had in Chase County, if there's somebody with 2,000, 3,000 acres, and there's 20 honeybee hives on it, and it's actively being transitioned to woody type biomes, is that agriculture? If there's 1,000 acres and they run 6 steers on it, is that agriculture? Are we costing the state money? Are we making it hard for me to compete with someone? The Senate Ag Committee dropped the ball last week on a deer permit bill, making it a little harder for out-of-state landowners to buy an in-state tag. Any state that treats hunting as an industry would never dream of doing it the way Kansas does. This is an opportunity for us to protect our range, keep it in agriculture for the families who live there year-round, and raise some money for the state. So with that, I'm open for questions.
Representative Neely.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had put down that I had a question, and you covered a little bit of it, but are you seeing the county or the city or anybody along those lines doing anything You know, I mean, other than, you know, say yourself and everything, if somebody's doing like what you're saying, I mean, other than shunning them or something that way, is there anything that's being done to prevent somebody from doing what, you know, allowing this to occur?
Chase County is a little different. I guess under oath here, I have burnt off people that didn't want to. We still have that ability to strong arm someone to do the right thing, but it's getting harder.
Representative Blex?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here. What's your feelings on conservation easement? Are you, and I'm assuming from your passion that you want to maintain the grassland and certainly don't want to see a housing development. We met a lot of opposition last year with the conservation bill, of which 50% would have went to conservation districts, which could have been cost share and leverage things for control of woody investments and providing money. However, that has went south. And the primary opposition to that, as I see it, is, you know, people, the 30-30, government wants to control federal government. They don't want any part of it. What programs and how do you see, what are you doing, and how do you see that as either a barrier or whatever?
So my own personal opinion, once again, you're going to see some people squirm behind me. Forever is a long time, especially towards the end. That's something my grandfather told me before he passed, and I think there was a lot of wisdom in that. He did not choose to do conservation easements because he didn't want to cap us on what we could do as far as accessing our own equity, for the value of these things, for inflation down the road. And so he used that term over and over again with me, and so I've been hesitant to embrace them for that very reason. If there was something that was a 20-year, 40-year term that I could do without constraining my grandkids that I haven't met yet, I'd be all over.
Can I follow up? And a lot of those options are 30 years. Some of them are indefinite, which is, I would tend to agree with you. My family's 1870s. I have the original deed signed by President Ulysses S. Grant. I understand that. However, you know, I will probably disagree with you on the deer permitting issue, having a long history with that. Do you allow commercial outfitters or deer hunting on your land?
Right now, I actually use it as an employee perk. I can't afford to, so I get some value out of it, but it's through employee benefits.
And what I'm finding, particularly like Stockwell and Elk counties, which is two of my counties, even some of the locals are losing their ability to hunt, which I kind of disagree with you. A deer is an organic product, just like a cow, and it has antlers that have a whole lot more value, and it gets up around herd bulls sometimes with some people. That's right, wrong, or in between. But we're seeing a ton of that area just being leased out, and wildlife leases are the bread and butter. They're making more money off of their outfitters or bringing hunters in as a value-added product, which some will build, you know, cabins and have everything. In our small towns, those little two-bedroom houses, the outfitters just come in and they'll renovate those and they'll have hunters in it. And I just went to Farm Bureau Forum in Moline, a swinging bridge, and that was the old hospital, and they've converted that into Cripple Creek Lodge, which is primarily outfitters, and she's still having out-of-state coyote hunters coming in to hunt coyotes, paying for somebody to hunt coyotes, and waterfowl hunters. So I guess I kind of disagree. We're with the concept that not everything has to go through a plow or a cow to be productive. And, you know, I've got cattle. You know, I farm, I ranch, and I understand I manage my grass ecosystem. I burn all the time. But I guess my other option is I see things, and I certainly don't like red cedars. You know, I've got a tree shear on my skid steer and we do damage. But it's the same token to those people that have more money than you and I will ever have. And that it will, and I know the Kansas Livestock Association, their meeting basically was grousing because out-of-state people were coming in and buying land that we couldn't afford. I just had that happen to me. I cried on an 80 next to me that I couldn't touch it. I couldn't pencil it out at my age to compete. But they'll also park their money in land when interest is low. So I guess I have a little bit of disagreement with that concept that they're totally outdoing us. And they certainly want cedars. They certainly want some woody cover to maintain that deer as a herd. I understand that, but there's a balance.
There is no balance on woody encroachment.
Thank you.
There is no sum.
Other questions? This side of the room, anyone? Anyone? All right. Very good. Thank you. Appreciate it. So that's Flint Hills Rancher. Let's go to the Red Hills Rancher and Russell Blue. Welcome to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, committee members. Quite ironic, Mr. Blue comes from the Red Hills. I know that's, no one's ever drawn that parallel before, but I promised Daniel through the first two speakers there, we were actually commiserating, and I made the comment that I said, I don't think I prepared enough for this, and Daniel agreed that he had not either, and I said, I promise I'll make you look really smart. So my name is Russell Blue. I'm from Barber County, Kansas. That's just southwest of Medicine Lodge. I'm a farmer and a rancher, fourth generation farmer and a rancher. I actually am one half of a general partnership, a family cow-calf operation. The other half of that operation is my brother CJ and his wife and family. And so we operate and manage land in Reno, Stafford, Barber, and Comanche counties. Before I get too far down the weeds in this, I have to make the caveat that I was contacted a few days ago about presenting to the committee here, and I have to rat on Tim Marshall. So Tim, he said, wondered if you'd be willing to present to the committee. And I said, that'd be great. I'd love to. That's quite an opportunity, and very grateful to have that chance to do that. And I said, as long as it isn't like next week, or something like that. I said, we're in the midst of calving season's right around the corner. We've got prescribed burning, which is what I'm going to speak to all of you today about. I said, it's a tough time of year. And he said, yeah, it's next week. So I said, we'll make it work. So I say that to say this. I don't have any prepared remarks. I don't have any PowerPoint presentation. I don't have any slides. However, what I do bring is some experience with prescribed fire in southwest Kansas. And so that's what I was asked to speak to you about today. So, so to give a little bit of history, just the ecology of rangeland, and it's important, I think, that we all understand that, fire is not anything new that is occurring to combat woody invasives. So, our rangeland, our native prairies were developed and maintained for thousands of years with two primary influences. That's grazing and periodic natural occurring fires. And so it wasn't until, about 150 years ago, the onset of English settlement, that we started seeing things change. So obviously the management, the grazing aspect of it changed. So those settlers grazed harder. In other words, they overstocked the native range relative to what it had been naturally. And also we saw conversion to crop acres. So there was a lot of those acres, those native prairie acres, that were converted to grain production. And also we saw fire suppression. And so what you saw is this mass exodus of naturally occurring fires on the native range. And so that has kind of brought us to where we're at today. And as you've gathered from the previous speakers, that there's a lot of data to suggest and support the idea that our native range is in dire straits, and we're certainly losing thousands upon thousands of acres annually. So the question is, how do we combat that? Well, prescribed fire, as some of the previous presenters have mentioned, is a natural tool to do that. And so what we found is that just putting the math to the acres that need to be burned to be maintained to keep that native prairie healthy is vast. And so what we find ourselves in a situation is where we can't effectively put enough fire on the range. In other words, we're not burning enough acres every year to keep up with that green glacier, as David Kraft so eloquently put. So we're trying to find ways to innovate and create bigger burn units. And so one way we do that is through prescribed burn associations. I think one of the earlier presenters mentioned that, David. So I think there's roughly 13 prescribed burn associations in the state of Kansas today. I happen to be a member of the Gyp Hills Prescribed Burn Association. I think we were the first PBA in the state of Kansas. I'm pretty sure. Don't quote me on that. However, it is essentially a collaboration between landowners and land managers, pooling resources and personnel and expertise to effectively put fire on those acres. And so David had mentioned the idea of the fire frequency, or the frequency at which those acres burn naturally. We typically try to put fire back on native range in an interval of about 5 to 7 years. And that's what we're working towards. Now, that having been said, what we find is when we are in a state of remediation, in other words, if we have a degraded state or a degraded range that has maybe, just say, 25 to 35% canopy of eastern red cedar, that's what we have in Barber County, we find that burn interval is not often enough because that seed source is so great, because you have 60 to 80 years of seed that has been stored there in the soil. And so in a state of remediation, we're trying to get fire back on those acres in an interval of about 3 to 4 years. And so we're hopeful that, we'll work to a point where those remediated acres can be maintained with less fire frequency. So I say all that to say this, that we are just not getting enough fire back on the landscape to stay ahead of it. So prescribed burn associations are effective, and it is, you've heard the term prescribed fire 20 times today, but the idea is that is exactly what it is. It's prescribed. And so when we decide that we need to execute a prescribed fire, there is a legitimate prescription. So we have a professional that writes a burn plan, and there is a desired outcome. And we are seeking a specific wind direction, a specific wind speed, specific humidity, specific ambient temperature. So all those things are taken into effect when we carry out a prescribed fire. So there's a lot of planning goes into it, a lot of preparation, prep work. So there is quite a bit to it. So the idea of fire mitigation. So you've heard the idea of these communities that are in dire, or I should say in the crosshairs, if you will, as far as a wildfire goes. And so speaking from experience, we had, I'm sure some of you remember, in 2016 and 2017, we had some large range fires in southwest Kansas. So we had, after having gone through that, we had seen that silver lining of that wildfire as an opportunity to put us back to a maintenance level, if you will. So those acres that we were trying to remediate, and we had these large adult cedars that we were trying to mechanically remove. In a matter of one afternoon, those trees were dead. And so we were no longer dealing with live cedar trees. We were dealing with dead carcass cedar trees, which are they're not using water for one. So we saw the hydrology react in a matter of about 72 hours. We saw springs appear on the ranch that hadn't been there for 60 plus years. So I've got to commend the previous speakers. Everything that they have spoke about, we've experienced. This is statewide. We've seen this firsthand, and I'm fortunate enough to be on a ranch known as Nichols Ranch, owned by a gentleman named Max Nichols, where that landowner, I don't own the ranch, I rent it and operate it and manage it. That landowner shares the same goal of conservation as I do. And so I would say that the ranch that I manage, that contiguous 15,000 acres of native range is a success story, and we're very proud of what it's become over the past 12 years. But it wasn't because I'm such a great manager. It's because there was a sound team, a collaborative effort. And so part of that was the Prescribed Burn Association that helped us carry out prescribed burns. It was organizations like NRCS with technical assistance and cost share programs to help us get mechanical removal done and get water development projects done. It was organizations like Kansas Grazing Lands Coalition for continued adult education through range academies and three-day range workshops to help get educated. So, this ranch has evolved, the ranch that I operate, but it certainly wasn't just my doing. So this is a community-driven effort, and that's what it takes. So in our part of the world, it's large country down there, so topography is rough, and so we can't burn fence line to fence line. We can't stop it at a fence row, so to speak, or at that property line. We have to use natural borders like roads and things like that. And so those are where we have to have the community effort, and we're working with neighbors and trying to collaborate to pull off larger fires. It's not uncommon for us to have a 5,000 to 6,000 acre prescribed fire. And, ultimately, we're still not keeping up with it. So, as I said, I don't have any prepared remarks. I will say that kind of, as far as what we struggle with is just personnel, same as any other industry in the state or in the country for that matter. So just logistically having enough people to carry those things out, and that's why the Prescribed Burn Associations are so helpful. But even within those organizations, we find ourselves shorthanded. So thank the committee for their time today, and by all means, any questions I'd be happy to field.
All right, any questions? Representative Blex?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here. Have you seen any increase in liability issues with high-end houses coming up, or the burn associations, who assumes that liability? And because there's always this fear out there for what might happen when you plan for it, but it always doesn't work out.
Well, the land operator carries liability, so the Prescribed Burn Association bears no liability in that regard. So it's up to the land operator or the landowner to carry that liability. And so, fortunately, Barber County, we're pretty far west. Now we aren't, I have seen, so I actually, a little bit of history on myself. I grew up in Reno County, just south of Hutchinson. And Hutchinson is a community that is, there was, prior to the Green Glacier moving in, there was native range on the north side of Hutchinson in the sandhills there. And so what you saw was a lot of expensive homes being built, and those poor souls that operate that grassland up there, I would be scared to death to carry out a prescribed fire. I mean, that would be frightening. So I couldn't speak to that directly, I'm sorry to say, but as I said, in Barber County, we're pretty desolate out there, and so we're very blessed to have a network of neighbors. I can't say I've got nothing but good neighbors to work with, and so when we carry out a fire, it might involve 3 to 4, maybe 5 landowners, similar to what you see in the Flint Hills. So it's a collaborative effort, and I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Gardner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your presentation. I think we've heard today that, this is a statewide problem, affects all areas of the state, and it's also a problem that is going to affect all people in the state, as we've heard some testimony that there is growing threat around metropolitan areas as well as agriculture land. As we look at this, what would be your recommendations as far as public policy to try and deal with this? Since we all have a stake in this game, we should, as policymakers here, come up with good public policy to try and at least manage this problem. What would be your recommendation?
Policy, I would have a hard time making that judgment call. However, I will say that public outreach and education is huge. And so for lack of a better term, eliminate the vilification of fire. And so, you know, it's, I would like to see Kansas Department of Ag own the message of grasslands. I think that's a very attainable goal. But in doing so, you know, we can certainly inform folks that maybe don't give grasslands a second thought about the idea of hydrology and how much water is actually lost to woody encroachment. And also obviously the danger of losing homes to wildfires, because prescribed fires prevent wildfires. That's just a matter of fact.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Blue, I understand that you have a cousin that's married to a Kansas State senator. Is that correct?
Completely false. No, sir.
Good.
That's true. That is true. Correct.
We were.
Yes, sir.
Senator Blue reminded me to be easy on you, and you've done quite well. So
God bless her.
Okay. Okay. So if I recall, Nichols Ranch and you all were the Leopold Conservation winners 2 years ago? Last year? 3 years ago?
No, not the Leopold Award. The ranch has won a number of awards, and we're very, very grateful for that. But again, you know, the ranch there are a lot of things that just fell into place as far as that ranch goes. So I've managed that place for about 12 years, and it was in pretty poor shape. And so,
so I guess that's my point.
Yes.
Where I'm getting to. My question is, I guess and I apologize. I was at some place where y'all got something. I don't remember what it was, but through that whole process, what have you learned? I mean, obviously you're doing something right to be recognized by peers and other organizations of some sort of conservation measures.
well, I would say that exactly what I had mentioned earlier is it is a collaborative effort. And so I can't say enough about NRCS and their technical staff. I can't say enough about Kansas Grazing Lands Coalition and continued education and their public outreach. It is a collaborative effort. It's not any one person. You know, I wouldn't be anywhere if it weren't for my landlord, the gentleman that owns the ranch, and his shared view for conservation and rehabilitation of native range. So this was the ranch as it is. Yes, we are very proud of it. However, it is an anomaly. It is an anomaly for sure. There are a lot of things that have fallen into place, and good people are one portion of that. So as an example, NRCS, I'm not necessarily a grass expert. I'm getting better, but I can reach out to those folks at NRCS. I've got a really good guy on speed dial, and I'm not necessarily a water systems expert, but I know one, and I can get a hold of him if I need to get a hold of him. And I've learned a lot on both of those avenues. But, you know, it's all about the tools in the toolbox and what tool to pull out to accomplish the goal.
Thank you. Representative Neely?
I have two quick questions. I grew up around the Sand Hills, and everything, a stone throw from there. My first question is, how quickly do you see the red cedar or whatever it is that when you burn and everything come back? Do you see it the same year? Do you see it start to sprout right back up and everything after you burn and just have to wait, or?
Great question. So, and we're talking about rehabilitated land. So that ranch that has been cedar covered or had that 35% canopy for 40 plus years. The short answer is not the first year, but what happens is the first mode of action as far as rehabilitation goes is mechanical removal. So you'll see skid steers with hydraulic saws or excavators with mulching attachments or articulated tractors with mulching attachments. We have used everything. All of those mechanisms we have used. I mean, everything all the way down to a ship anchor chain draped between two D7 cats. We've done it. But the question is directed towards how quick we see the cedar seeds come back. And those tracked equipment, with the soil disturbance that is done with those tracks, You get seed to soil contact, and typically you'll see little seedlings start coming. Once those big trees are gone, after mechanical removal, you've eliminated the competition for sunlight and moisture, and you'll see those seedlings come back, and in my experience, about 3 years. And so typically, and just really rudimentary speaking, as far as kind of protocol, what we do when we start rehabilitating land that has been overgrown and that 35 to 40% canopy of cedar trees is, first of all, we destock and try and rehabilitate the grass species that are out there. Typically, those ranches have been overgrazed. We also start with mechanical removal, so the mechanisms that I just mentioned earlier, by any means necessary. And we do in the hills, in the Red Hills, we've got really deep canyons, so we do something we call cut and stuff, and so we're cutting those uplands and stuffing those trees in the canyons, in those areas that are inaccessible to tracked or wheeled equipment. And that material serves as fodder for our prescribed fire. When we do carry out our prescribed fire, that serves as fodder to get those trees to ignite. And past about 2 years, we usually can grow enough fuel, providing that the grass has not just been completely depleted. Usually we can stockpile enough fuel to carry out a prescribed fire. And I got to tell you, it depends on the rainfall. And of course, we're pretty far west relative to Chase County and some of the other speakers you heard about today. Certainly not the Flint Hills. But there are places where it takes 7 to 10 years to rehab that land. You know, it's from the seed source that's out there, and just depending on how it was managed. Some of these ranches have been, the native species are pretty few and far between. It takes them quite a bit. So I'd say 2 to 7 years is what it takes. So.
Well, and I spent my summers just probably south of you in the Hartner, Alva area. And so my next question is your soil brown or red?
Red. Yep. Yeah, it's red.
Other questions? Seeing none? Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thanks so much.
All right. Well, committee, that was interesting. Thank you so much, all of you, for participating today, and obviously some things to think about, and very much aware of, what went on in California and some of our communities, and when that many years ago we got pretty close to Hutch. I know in some of those fires, and many of us have worked on it, and 2 of my counties were part of the 4-county fire from a couple of years ago. So we will continue this conversation, I'm sure, in the days ahead. Committee, the minutes for the last few meetings have been emailed to you, so we will approve those next week. We will not be meeting the rest of this week, but we will be meeting on Monday. So we will, is that right? I'm sorry, no meeting on Monday, Tuesday. So that's almost, right? Yes. Meeting Tuesday and Thursday right now of next week. So what we will do is we will have a bill hearing on Senate Bill 36, and then a bill on hearing on Senate Bill 89. One of those is the poultry bill, and one of those is conservation bill. And we will also next Thursday, a week from this Thursday, we will be working the higher blend of ethanol tax credit bill, which will become a grant bill, and we will discuss that as we go. Anything else for the good of the cause? Again, we will meet next Tuesday, a week from today. With that, we are adjourned.